So when a user wants to find an instance inside the map, they'll call the resolve method. This resolve method takes the type to resolve and returns the type it's mapped to. So the type to resolve will typically be an abstract type, and the type to map to will be the concrete type. And this resolve method goes through 5 steps. It has to find the type we've been asked for in the registrations map. It looks inside that type and it finds the constructor with the largest number of parameters. So we need some rule as to which constructor to use. So if a type has multiple constructors, the base rule will be pick the largest one. It then has to resolve all of those constructor parameters. And it will do that by calling resolve on the type. So we come back into this method until we have all the constructor parameters that we need. It then looks at the mapping and the constructor parameter mapping from the configuration and looks for any arguments defined in that mapping. And it will use those to fill in any gaps inside the constructor. And finally, we can use this constructor to recreate the type and return that from this call. So this is the container code. So the container gets past the name of the path that contains our config file. It creates a loader, and it asks that loader to load up the registrations from the config file, and it calls this helper method called register converters that we'll come back to a little later. What we look at now is the resolve class. So the first steps of the resolve method are pretty straightforward. The first thing we do is to reach into the registrations and check that the type is registered, and then get back the registration object for that type. The registration object also contains a list of the constructor parameters for the type that's been registered. So once we have the registration information for the type, we can use that to get the constructor parameters. Once we have this information, we now want to try and create an instance of the type. So what we have here is something like this. We have a registration that says I want to map iMeetingService to meeting service. So the application has asked for an iMeetingService, and our configuration says map iMeetingService to meeting service. So we need to get the class object for whatever the map to is, and then find the largest constructor that this meeting service type here actually has. And then we can create an instance of that type. So one step at a time. Our config JSON contains a map to field that gives us the name of the type that we are mapping to. This is the concrete type we want to create. And our registration helper has a registration.getMapTo call. And that getMapTo call returns the name of the class here. Once I have that, I can then get the class object for that class. So I can say class.forename on the registration.getMapTo value. Given the class, I'm now going to call a helper function called getLongestConstructor. GetLongestConstructor will return me a constructor object that references the constructor of this class returned by getMapTo. This is the constructor that has the largest number of parameters. GetLongestConstructor is pretty straightforward. It gets the constructors from the class. By default, sets the longest constructor to be the first one from that list. Iterates over all the constructors, getting the parameter count for them, and if the parameter count of the one it's currently selecting is larger than the parameter count of the current longest constructor, then simply resets longest constructor, and finally just returns that value to us. So back here, at this point, we now know what the longest constructor for this class is. And now what we need to do is to go away and resolve all the parameters for that constructor. And we need to do this iteratively. So if we find a parameter that's been registered, it's a registered type in our config, we need then to resolve that and then do the same thing for its constructor and so on and so forth.